Aloha. Welcome to the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center's Transnational Crime Community of Interest videocast, where we connect with transnational crime experts to hear what is happening around the world. I'm Keith Wilkins, your host today for this videocast. Joining us today is Mario from Interpol. Mario started his professional career in the Navy and was then engaged as a police officer in the Maritime Police. He then moved to the Directorate General for Fisheries and Maritime Affairs with the European Commission before joining Interpol in 2014. His experience involves leading police investigations related with maritime crimes, investigating alleged infringements by vessels, and assisting with advice in all technical aspects regarding fishing activities. In his current role with Interpol, Global Fisheries Enforcement, he provides daily operational support to Interpol member countries on ongoing investigations. In the interest of law enforcement safety, we will not be using Mario's full name today. Hi, Mario. We appreciate you taking out your time of your busy day to join us today. What recent maritime crime, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing trends is Interpol seeing in the Indo-Pacific region?
Hi there. Yes, so it's certainly, we have seen a complexity on the modus operandi used by these criminal organized groups behind those rock vessels assaulting and depleting the resources. The increased use of supporting vessels at sea, it's also part of that modus operandi being used by those organizations. The increase of fraudulent documentation, it's another aspect, and the increase of labor exploitation, and in certain cases even human trafficking. So all those components completely change the landscape regarding the illegal fishing and associated crimes these days. As to opposite of what was happening in the past, where the illegal fishing was a more traditional, sometimes even passionate way, which would be someone with an old vessel going to the waters, to forbidden waters or forbidden area, and fishing for some catches. These days, the organizations are bigger and bigger behind those vessels and more complex, where they use huge resource and they get hold of all even new technologies in order to be successful in their endeavor in exploiting the seas and depleting their resources. So those are the key elements, really. The complexity, if you want, in specific words, the complexity of these organizations, the use of supporting vessels at sea, because this will allow them, that the rock vessels without documents, with the labor exploitation, to remain at sea, while meanwhile the catches are laundered back to port by those supporting vessels. And increased fraudulent documentation, it's another one, and obviously the infamous labor exploitation, where you can find people being paid as much as for 18 hard working hours, you can get as much as 40 cents, 0.4 of the dollar per hour. Working sometimes in minus 30 degrees, if they are working in the Antarctica, for instance, or above 40 degrees, whether they are working in equatorial waters.
Great, thank you, Mario. Could you tell me about a recent operation that Interpol conducted, and what were the lessons learned?
Well, we have several. There's always something ongoing, but probably one that is more comfortable to me to talk about, because it's a closed case, and therefore is now a cold case for us, and it's more easy for me to talk about it. Maybe the STS-50 or the André Dolgov, as was initially called, when we start tracking it back when we were asked by one of the member countries. this was an epic journey, really. It took us years to get hold of this vessel. And this was basically a rock vessel fishing in Antarctic region. It was Russian owned by a Russian national, but the companies were based in South Korea, and the vessel was flagged to Sierra Leone with crew from Ukraine, Russia, Indonesia, and a crewing agency based in Singapore, and the operator working out of Hong Kong and Seoul, Korea, South Korea. So that alone gives you an idea of the complexity, and get back to your previous question regarding what has changed in the tackling the IUU fishing these days. It's exactly this complexity associated here. So this vessel was particularly important because, as I said, we were on the chase for it for several years. They absconded from several jurisdictions, including China, Mozambique. So you see from China and in the Yellow Sea, he went all the way to southwest Indian Ocean, and where he was arrested after our cooperation with Mozambique, with our National Center Bureau in Maputo, where we have warned them that they would have a rock vessel in their ports, and they have arrested the vessel, they have seized the documents, they have notified the captain. Still, during the night, they fled. And then the hot pursuit started, a virtual hot pursuit, because there was no exactly a vessel or a naval asset or an aerial asset following it, but rather us with using technology to tracking the vessel, up to the point that that was at the later stage arrested, boarded, inspected, and arrested by Indonesia. And so this is actually a clear case where one of the key elements that have changed the landscape these days, and one of the main findings in fighting this type of crime, which is the international cooperation, but effective and in a timely manner, international cooperation. This is key, because whenever you go to any international forum, you will hear about the international cooperation probably 50 to 40 times. I have counted once 42 times people talking about international cooperation. I decided to take note how many times people were saying this. But in fact, in the daily basis, people will not cooperate, or they will cooperate, but it's not in a timely manner. And you would appreciate as a Coast Guard that when you have out there a naval asset holding a vessel, you do not have indefinitely time to hold that vessel. So you need the cooperation of, I don't know, Equatorial Guinea to confirm the details of that vessel, but like in 1 hour, 2 hours, not in 3-4 days or weeks, right? So that's a very important issue, which is the effective cooperation. So meaning providing the necessary information, complete information, and in a timely manner. Because if it will come after, I don't know, 12 hours, probably the patrol vessel will have, well, I have to let go this guy, otherwise it will be a liability for my agency. So that's one of the issues outstanding out of this. And in this particular case, there's more than a dozen of countries involved in this cooperation, all coordinated by us, but also NGOs were involved. Also international governmental organizations were involved, like RFMO secretariats were involved, but also non-for-profit organizations. So that's why this is quite iconic, and it can illustrate or what can be achieved with the effective and a timely manner cooperation. Here, I would like to end up this question with a special word that needs to be said to the Indonesians, and particularly to the Minister Susi, the former Minister of Fisheries, which was tireless, and the commitment and to Cooperate International was behind any doubt. And so you have an expression, putting the money where you have the mouth, or something like this. So that's exactly what she was doing. She was announcing international cooperation, and she was making it effective on the daily basis. So whenever we reach out to Indonesia to cooperate in securing a vessel that was passing by, they would do it. And in that sense also, the team that she had put together, so they had put it together, a presidential task force to combating IUU fishing. That was an outstanding resource that Indonesia has created and actually should be replicated elsewhere. So this is actually a message that if you allow me to convey, is that to tackle this sort of high organized crime, only inter-region cooperation at national, international level can have effective results.
Mario, thank you so much, and great example of just the spider web that IUUF is for, when it comes to transnational organized crime, and then how important it really is, to build that trust interagency, internationally, so that you can share the information at the right time in an efficient and effective manner. So great example, and thank you so much for sharing. So kind of building that, and I think you hinted at some of this, but does this crime intersect other areas? And if so, tell us about it.
Well, yes, certainly. Sorry if I have extended too much or on that question alone. But yeah, as I mentioned, certainly the labor exploitation, it's one of the most striking events. And that's also one of the things that we are reinforcing our member states whenever we have the opportunity to work with them, whether this is through capacity building activities, or whether this during operational support that we provide when we deploy to support on specific events. So we take those opportunities to work with them, like mentoring them in real case scenario, and particularly the labor exploitation was one of the issues that we have noticed that was kind of being disregarded, in the sense that no one was asking for the contracts of the crew. So the International Labour Organization, the Convention 188, where foresees a lot of these standards, and also the living standards on board, it's something that they should be looking to it. So we have worked with them and tried to raise them the concerns about those items. For instance, one practical example, it's they would pick up the crew list of a third country vessel coming to their ports, but they would not cross-check it, for instance, with the passports or the seaman's book that were being given to them. And those passports being cross-checked against the physical persons on board. So that led to situations where you would have, let's just in the figure, 20 persons on board, 20 passports, and 20 people identified in the crew list. However, there were some fraudulent documentation in there. So the document does not correspond in reality to the person on board. Or worse, they would have 20 people and only 18 passports. You see, so there was some undocumented people on board. Now, why would you have someone undocumented on board? Probably because they would have been, either they don't want to show us the real names of the person, or they were just simply smuggled in, like it is the case particularly, and without citing any country in specific, but Southeast Asia is particularly affected by this. People are deceived, asked to go and work on a factory, and they end up on a port, kicked up to a boat. Next time that they will come ashore, it will be within 3 years or 4 years, or eventually never, which is unfortunately becoming more and more common, or at least we know more and more. The thing is that this is not, people say that it's a new issue, that's a new crime, but actually we prefer to look into it as a previously neglected crime. So the crime has occurred already for several years, but now it has been just exposed. And obviously associated, whenever you have illegal fishing, obviously you will have tax evasion, you will have fraudulent documentation, obviously, and you need money laundering, because if you can't prove from where it came, you need to launder that money, right? And obviously, the whole base of this, it's the endemic corruption across the countries, and no country is safe in that regard, to be honest.
Thank you, Mario. And I think from our discussion earlier, really the graphic that you shared of the iceberg is such a good reference of just everything you just talked about, that the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more that's below the waterline.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
So kind of just, let's bring it into a little bit with our pandemic that's going on right now. Are you seeing any changes in bad actor activity because of COVID-19? Specifically, is there an increase of activity? And how are partner nations adapting to the changing or building resilience during this pandemic?
Yeah, so that's a difficult one. We really do not have concrete figures on this. Mainly, our main role is to support law enforcement agencies in their daily work. Okay, when they face investigative needs, challenges that they need our support, that's where we are. But however, you can easily think that certainly with all those constraints that you see ashore, once you move them to on board of a vessel, the challenges are enormous and a lot bigger, because the space on board is the confinement of the space already on board. So to maintain a healthy working environment when you inspect a vessel, it's very difficult. So you would imagine that the inspections in port and at sea would have been withheld during this pandemic, would have been reduced for the sake of the safety of the law enforcement staff. That's quite understood. I mean, but however, this from one side. So the concerns about the law enforcement staff, I can imagine that all countries across the world would have those concerns, and therefore would have refrained from doing more exhaustive and more complete inspections to those vessels. But for another side, you can be sure that the criminals, if they feel the slack of the law enforcement, wherever they go, whether at sea or in ports, they will use it to their profit. So, because as you know, and we used to have here a colleague that has a great sentence about this. Illegal fishing for them, it's just fish swimming. It's just money swimming in the sea. You see, so it's for them. They don't care whether the way they do and what do they need to do. And if they see a window of opportunity, they will try to use it to their gains. So obviously, and again, one of the other problems might be associated with would be, third countries vessels coming to your port. It's another jurisdiction that is coming in. So for instance, I don't know, I'm from Portugal. A vessel coming to Portugal, to my port, and coming from, I don't know, let's say Liberia, do I know what are the Liberia standards imposed to the Liberian flag vessels in terms of safety, in terms of sanitary conditions? I have no idea. So the risk, it's multiplied by, I don't know how many. So before, and as the Coast Guard, the safety, it's always present when we plan a boarding and inspection of a vessel, whether at sea or in port. But obviously, with this context of the pandemic, these risks went through the roof. So with all combined, I can only expect that an increase of the IUU activity, but I'm sure that the member countries would have been doing the best they can under the current circumstances to still be able to tackle the problem.
Thanks, Mario. And yeah, it really is challenging times for all of us, especially when it comes to some of our law enforcement activities. Now, before we wrap up, can you offer what are top 3 resources you recommend for our audience to learn more on this topic, and why?
Well, for us, I don't know your students, probably whether they work for international organization or if they would be working more at national level. If it is at national level, the task is relatively more simpler, I would say. But for us, in working on international level, obviously the UNCLOS, so the United Nations law of the sea, it's obviously like the holy book of law enforcement out at sea, particularly in the high seas, behind the national jurisdiction. Okay, so behind the 200 nautical miles, that's your holy book. After that, obviously, you would have, depending on the area where you are, the RFMO affecting that area, management and conservation measures of that RFMO. And then if you need to cooperate internationally, probably the United Nations Transnational Organized Crime Convention, so called Palermo Convention, it's another instrument that you might want to take a look and look closely to those. Then obviously we are talking about IUU fishing. Obviously the reference where all it started with FAO, right? So all those documents at FAO, particularly the International Plan of Action to Combat IUU Fishing, it's a reference. Then the Port State Measures Agreement, it's another reference. It's sometimes even mandatory because some of the countries would have already endorsed that convention, that agreement. Obviously for us, I would have the Interpol Constitution, but so those things we cannot, so we are always looking into those. And in terms of the rest of the resources, so all those resources are available online, and your students can certainly access them quite easily. And some of them are actually PDFs that you can download them. That's what I recommend, and to bring them with them to the field in order to be independent and be accessible to all of these.
Thanks, Mario. And yeah, just highlighting the importance of that international collaboration and coordination is educating yourself on some of the documents that already exist out there and the strategies. So in wrapping up, we're going to finish with one fun question. Who would you be if you could be any movie, TV, or superhero character?
All right, that's a hard ball. That's a curveball, as you say, right? That's a very difficult one. Being a judge on your own trial. Well, I think the type of hero differs with your age. When you were, in your childhood, you would have certain type of heroes. When you go to teenage times, you would have another ones, probably those with superpowers. And as you grow up, you start thinking that probably, and those that transmit the human characteristics may be announced, but the human characteristics would be my favorite one, and that transmit traditional values, probably. Committed, focused, someone that could be committed, focused, resilient. That's another thing that I want to recommend to your students, to be resilient and think out of the box. And tireless, humble, selfless, loyal. All these human characteristics, all those positive characteristics that you can find in another human being that you can have. Now, it's difficult to find it in cinema. And as I said, when you grow up, you change your role model, right? And in that sense, and building on those characteristics, I think I would identify my father as such. And therefore, that would be my role model. That would be my superhero, without a cape, without a with superpowers, but certainly someone with those characteristics, which I think it would be the most important, honestly. And therefore, but if you want to translate those into a movie cinema, to cinema figure, I don't know, I like the movies of 24 with because he has no superpowers and just him being highly trained and skilled. So, but yeah, my father would be my superhero.
Great. Thank you so much, Mario. And thank you very much for joining us today from Lyon to inform us of the great work that Interpol is doing in the maritime domain. We look forward to connecting with you in the future. Mahalo and aloha.